Hi, I'm Murray Carter from Carter Cutlery. Today I want to give you an update about the steels that we use in our knives and why we use them. Years ago when I started bladesmithing in my early 20s over in Japan, I learned how to forge weld Hitachi white steel and blue steel to Japanese Gokunan Tetsu, which is their version of mild steel that's specifically smelted for knives because it's tough, there's no impurities in it, and it's very easy to sharpen. The white steel is essentially just iron with between 1 and 1.4% carbon added to it. But what really distinguishes it is the lack of phosphorus and sulfur, so it's exceptionally clean. The blue steel they use in Japan is the white steel as a base with a couple of alloying elements added to it, namely tungsten and vanadium. And blue super has, I think, chromium and molybdenum as well. They're very simple, straightforward steels, especially the white steel. And when forged at low temperature and annealed correctly, cold forged and quenched in water and tempered properly, it can make an exceptional blades. And we've actually built a wonderful reputation, as many of you know, on our excellent blades that we use, that we make in the traditional Japanese style. When I asked my Japanese teachers in Japan, well, what really is the practical difference between blue steel and white steel, it wasn't so easy to get an answer. And in fact, in Japan, if you ask too many questions as an apprentice, that can get you in trouble. But I researched it and kind of came to the conclusion that when you cut things, there are two phenomena. There are things that you cut and you keep, and there are things that you cut and you throw away. An example of cutting and keeping would be food preparation, or for example, carving a duck decoy, or shaving your face. And cutting and throw away would be like opening up cardboard boxes all day, or blazing a trail through the woods where you're just, cutting the brush and just leaving it lay as it is. And I kind of came to the conclusion that when you cut and keep things, the quality of the cut, or the edge of the blade, is of utmost importance. And that's where white steel really shines, because it's a simple steel and has really fine carbides, and they're very equally dispersed and so on. And when you're just cutting and throwing things away, the quality of the cut isn't as important as edge retention, so you can cut for a long time between sharpenings, and that's where I found that blue steel was better in general. Now, most of the blades that I make, especially the kitchen knives and the neck knives and some of the outdoor knives I make, I would say predominantly fall into the characterization of cutting and keeping. I know a lot of people who even shave their face with my neck knives, and they do little crafts with them. And of course, everyone's cutting food with my kitchen knives and so on. And many years ago, roughly 4 or 5 years ago, I came out and through my newsletter at the time announced to the world that I was going to stop using blue steel in favor of trying to master white steel. I had heard in Japan, and from my limited experience of having forged something like 18,000 blades, had seen that white steel had tremendous potential, but I felt I hadn't quite realized all of the potential, and I really wanted to. And so I didn't want to confuse my study by introducing too many variables. So I thought I'll just limit it down to white steel, #1, and by golly, I'll try to master that. I'm happy to say that these many years later, I feel like I'm at a point where I'm getting really good results with white steel. It's been roughly 4,000 or 5,000 blades since I stopped using blue steel and only was using white steel. And I've discovered that it's not as much about the steel, actually, as it is about the process and the bladesmith's reverence for his materials and reverence for the craft, and always bringing your A game to the forge and never letting any substandard product slip from your grasp and out into the market. And several experiments kind of proved this for me. In fact, I had a fellow a bladesmith in the industry say, Murray, I would think that 52-100, which is a commonly used steel here in North America, would behave very similarly to your Hitachi white steel number 1 if you forge welded it like you do between 2 layers of Goku Nantetsu, and then go through your process of the cold forging and quenching in water and so on. And I took him up on his suggestion, and I was so surprised to see that once I took this steel that was other than the Hitachi white or blue steel through my lengthy and careful process, metallurgical process to make a blade, that it actually performed almost on par with my white steel. And then I did some crazy experiments like forge welding steel cable together into a billet, and then forge welding that between 2 pieces of Goku Nantetsu, and then going through the low, successively lower temperatures as I forged it, and annealing it, cold forging it, and quench it and temper it and so on. And I found that that even offered some amazing performance, given that it was a substandard material to start with. So my conclusion was, it's not really the steel, it's the process, it's the cleanliness of the forge, and it's the skill of the bladesmith. So once I started feeling comfortable that I had gained the kind of intimacy and understanding and mastery over the white steel, and then I had the opportunity to try to make the world's lightest, strongest combat knife, or most durable combat knife, and I already had some 1035 and blue super steel laminate from way back in the day, I thought, you know, I think it's time. Maybe I'll branch back into making some blades out of blue steel as well, because I feel comfortable doing it, because I believe I've mastered the process. And here we are today, and I'm now making blades out of some blue steel, and I'm making some out of white steel, and I'm basically applying the exact same process. There are little tiny idiosyncrasies with the blue steel that you don't have with the white steel, and by paying attention to those, I believe we're now making the best knives here at Carter Cutlery, myself and my Muteki bladesmiths, that we've ever made before. And it's because we pay homage to the process, and we understand that 90% of it is all about the bladesmith and what he brings to work with him when he gets here every day. So I just wanted to update everybody and give an explanation as to why, despite 4 or 5 years ago coming out with a big statement saying I was only going to use white steel number 1 anymore, and here we are 4 or 5 years later, and we've got some blue steel knives coming down the works, and that's resulted in a little bit of confusion, but I hope that clarifies it. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, send them to us here at cartercutlery.com. And why don't you join the 21,000 plus subscribers to our channel at YouTube and be one of the contributors to almost 3.2 million views. This is Murray Carter from Carter Cutlery saying stay sharp.